America's biggest civilian ammunition producer, Federal Remington, CCI, and Speer, all owned by Vista Outdoor under its ammunition division, the Kinetic Group, has been sold to a foreign defense conglomerate. The factories are still in Arkansas, Minnesota, and Idaho, but the boardroom decisions now happen 4,500 miles away, in Prague. What happens when the supply chain for your home defense ammo gets prioritized for a foreign war or a European ESG directive? In this video, we'll talk about why every shooter should pay close attention to the $2 billion buyout of the Kinetic Group by the Czechoslovak Group, what it means for your ammo prices, availability, and legal protections going forward, and how you can prepare now before shelves go empty again. You'll learn how Vista Outdoor quietly split off its entire ammunition arm after nearly 3 years of legal and financial maneuvering, how CSG, a foreign company with deep military contracts but no obligation to the United States of America, took full control, and why this changes the risk equation for every civilian, hunter, police officer, and reloader in the country. We'll break down why this matters more than just ownership on paper. From quiet supply throttling to foreign policy leverage and ATF red tape, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff. It's strategic chess that affects your trigger time and your liberty. Stick around, and we'll cover what to stock, which brands to trust, and how to keep yourself from being the last guy at the range holding a box with nothing left to load. Vista Outdoor didn't put out fireworks or a ticker tape parade when it decided to split itself in half and unload its ammunition arm. The chunk, eventually branded the Kinetic Group. For 937 days, the staff inside Anoka, Minnesota, Lenoke, Arkansas, Lewiston, Idaho, and Sweet Home, Oregon kept filling boxes while corporate lawyers shuffled papers nobody outside the boardroom could read. On November 27th of last year, the ink dried. Czechoslovak Group, headquartered in Prague and chaired by 30-something industrialist Michal Strnad, walked away with every machine that stamps Federal on a head stamp, every green box of Remington core locked, and the legendary rimfire lines that feed a nation's plinkers. 3,800 American employees now swipe badges that ultimately answer to a foreign defense empire. The price tag exceeded $2 billion, financed through J.P. Morgan Chase and waved through by the Federal Trade Commission and a freshly refiled CFI-US review. If you missed it on the evening news, that wasn't by accident. Thanksgiving leftovers and Black Friday sales camouflage a lot of corporate house cleaning. So, who just bought the bullets? CSG began as a scrapyard hustle after the Iron Curtain collapsed, flipping surplus Soviet armor the way collectors flip World War II rifles. Today, it employs more than 10,000 people across defense, aerospace, mobility, radar, and yes, ammunition. The group owns Fiocchi in Italy and Fiocchi of America, the bespoke shotgun icon Perazzi, and the Tatra truck line that hauls artillery pieces through Himalayan passes. Strnad brags that the company has more tanks than the Czech and Slovak armies combined, and that isn't marketing fluff. The man keeps actual self-propelled guns in inventory the way the rest of us keep spare tires. He sells artillery shells to Ukraine, he holds NATO security clearances, and he has no overt ties to Beijing or Moscow. But none of that guarantees he shares a deep cultural attachment to the Second Amendment. He answers to Czech law, European market pressures, and global military contracts first. American civilian shooters come somewhere after that in the pecking order. The brand names on the ammo aisle still look as red, white, and blue as a 4th of July picnic. Yet from December forward, those brands are tethered to a board of directors you can't vote out with a shareholder motion. CSG says the factories will stay put. And from a dollars and cents angle, that promise adds up. Moving a 100-year-old rimfire line out of Idaho would cost a fortune, and American supply chains for brass, lead, and powder already function. But location is only half the story. Production priority matters more. When the next overseas conflict demands another surge in 5.56 or 7.62, civilian allocations are the first to shrink. A foreign owner owes you no explanation for diverting a month's worth of primers to a NATO depot instead of the shelves at Bass Pro. If the White House leans on CSG through diplomatic channels, something harder to do with a truly domestic corporation, civilian backorders could stretch from weeks to quarters and into years. The ammo famine of 2020 taught us exactly how fast a run on cartridges empties shelves, even when every plant runs flat out. Jason Vanderbrink, the straight-talking hunter who turned Remington ammunition around after Vista rescued it from bankruptcy, insists everything inside the fences will keep humming exactly as before. He argues that private ownership beats chasing quarterly Wall Street targets. No more sacrificing long-term tooling upgrades to hit an earnings call 30 days away. On paper, that's appealing. Still, Vanderbrink answers to Prague now, not to a Minnesota board meeting. CSG didn't spend $2 billion for the view. Sooner or later, it will redirect capex toward its strategic interests, not necessarily ours. Anyone who's followed corporate takeovers in the firearms space knows how mission statements evolve once the ink dries. Control the ammo, and you control the tempo of armed America. Washington can pass all the May-issue licensing schemes it wants, but without bullets, even the most freedom-friendly state becomes a silent range. That's why the real risk isn't a midnight confiscation order. It's a silent constriction of supply dressed up as global responsibility. A foreign-owned firm can claim moral high ground by curbing civilian sales whenever headlines turn ugly. Imagine a high-profile mass shooting 6 months from now. U.S. politicians mouth the usual talking points, yet stockpiles stay untouched because domestic makers trust the lawful customer base. Under new management, the press release practically writes itself. Out of an abundance of caution, we've paused shipments of centerfire rifle ammo to the civilian market while we review our distribution policies. They avoid lawsuits, dodge activist heat, and curry favor with lawmakers who secretly love the choke point. Your local shop displays empty pegs once more. Diplomats hold even subtler levers. A Cold War arms limitation treaty could redefine excessive civilian capacity, nudging foreign producers to throttle export classified components. The same factory that kneels to a European environmental directive on lead could quietly starve U.S. reloaders of primer compound under the banner of sustainability. That scenario rings paranoid until you remember how California and the EU already banned traditional lead shot for waterfowl and require weird tin bismuth cocktails priced like artisan chocolate. For big conglomerates, chasing compliant profit in Europe often outweighs pushing back in America. Supply manipulation need not be malicious. A battlefield priority order for Ukraine artillery propellant today becomes a 6-month backlog for domestic handgun powder tomorrow. Sturnad can honestly claim he's supporting freedom abroad while your small-town defensive training course downsizes because 45 ACP Flatpoint remains out of stock. He's not obliged to explain why the Lewiston line feeding 12-gauge target loads dropped from 3 shifts to 2. Nor does he have to disclose that the extra shift capacity moved to a plant making 155mm bagged charges. Unseen trade-offs are still trade-offs. Consolidation breeds price volatility too. Federal Remington, CCI, Speer, and Fiocchi now report up the same chain of command. When commodity inputs spike, who stops the board from equalizing margins across every brand? A simultaneous 3% price nudge on 5 different labels means the market lacks a competitor to keep things honest. Add Alliant powder to the same umbrella and reloaders face limited alternatives when jug prices jump double digits. Even if some boutique maker holds prices, distribution middlemen will peg their numbers to the higher corporate average. The knock-on effect rolls down to every steel target competition and turkey hunt. Law-abiding citizens aren't the only ones scanning shelves during an ammo drought. Local police departments without military-grade stockpiles rely on federal and Speer contracts for duty rounds. A supply shift that funnels 9mm to Europe could force smaller agencies to bid against each other just to keep qualification cycles alive. Anti-gun lobbyists then label the chaos proof that civilians are hoarding and demand more restrictions. The narrative writes itself. If only we limited panic buying, there'd be enough for law enforcement. Meanwhile, the root cause traces back to foreign boardroom calculus. The ATF isn't blind to leverage opportunities. A future administration may have little appetite for head-on fights over rifle bans, yet plenty of appetite for backdoor regulations on imported components. With foreign-owned domestic factories, that line blurs. Is brass shipped from Idaho to an Arkansas loading line considered interstate or international? A clever bureaucrat could argue the paperwork threshold shifts once the parent company isn't American. Each new form delays a pallet, each delay inflates cost, and each cost bump scares casual gun owners out of regular practice. Skill fades, freedom decays by neglect more often than by decree. Perhaps you trust CSG today. Fair enough. The company did keep Fiocchi's Missouri and Arkansas plants running, even expanded output. Leadership speaks fluent marketing about America's hunting heritage. Yet corporate stewardship can flip faster than a bad magazine spring. Economic downturns invite distant investors looking to recoup capital. A BlackRock-style fund or a state-controlled holding company from somewhere far less liberty-minded could snap up a majority stake years from now. Once the supply chain leaves domestic hands, bringing it back costs more than any of us can crowdfund. So, where does that leave ordinary shooters? Panic buying tomorrow morning won't fix systemic vulnerability, but intelligent stocking cushions shocks. Rotate training ammo while it's plentiful, maintain a steady reserve of defensive loads, and consider diversifying calibers. If the Big 5 throttle 9mm yet 38 Special remains available from smaller outfits, having at least one wheel gun stashed isn't the worst hedge. Invest in components even if you're not a dedicated handloader today. A single-stage press and a couple thousand primers look cheap when shelves echo. Support domestic up-and-coming brands like Steinel, Centerfire, or boutique brass stampers that keep ownership stateside. Finally, stay politically active. Contact representatives when quiet regulations on reloading chemicals pop up. Congressional staffers notice a flood of respectful, informed calls more than you think. We aren't at the cliff edge yet, but if this acquisition doesn't jolt you awake, nothing will. The pandemic proved how fragile logistics can be, and that was before a foreign board took over America's brass pipeline. Remember how 9mm soared from $13 a box to $50? Remember driving 2 counties to score a single brick of 22? Now imagine that scenario unfolding while European policy advisors, Treasury officials, and global ESG auditors lean over CSG's shoulder. The sensible path forward is preparation without hysteria. Build a baseline store, training ammo to cover 6 months of normal range trips, plus a healthy reserve of your chosen defensive load. Invest in a second set of dies and a manual if you haven't hand-loaded before. At minimum, you'll understand the process when you barter for primers later. Pay attention to legislation cloaked as environmental stewardship that targets lead or excess stockpiles. Educate friends new to firearms so they grasp why supply matters more than the latest polymer pistol hype. Freedom thrives when the average citizen stays capable, not merely armed in name. The largest civilian ammunition producer in the United States didn't shutter. It simply changed flags. That alone won't sink the republic, but it creates a vulnerability that bad actors at home and abroad can exploit. Whether this foreign buyout becomes a renaissance of investment or a slow squeeze depends on vigilance. Yours, mine, and every shooter who won't outsource responsibility for liberty. Tell us in the comments whether you believe CSG will honor its promises or you see storm clouds on the horizon. Slam the like button if this breakdown saved you from learning the hard way at the gun counter. Share the video with your range buddies so they aren't blindsided. Subscribe and ring that bell because we'll keep tracking every move these global boardrooms make. The ammo may still roll off American machines, but the power to throttle it just crossed an ocean.